What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court. I am Sean Murphy, and today we're going to be talking about Michael Porter Jr. If you did not hear, over the weekend, Michael Porter Jr. agreed to a 5-year, $207 million contract with the Denver Nuggets. And in the NBA world, there were some people that were quite shocked by this figure. But if you've been paying attention, this contract actually makes total sense. And I think Michael Porter Jr. could be one of the next superstars in the NBA. In this video, I'm going to be explaining why. If you like that, be sure to leave a like and comment in the comment section down below. What do you think of Michael Porter Jr.? Do you think of him as highly as I do? With that, let's talk about why I think he could be a superstar in this league. So, Michael Porter Jr. was one of the most dominant high school players in the last 20 years of high school basketball. He was considered one of the most dominant high school players since LeBron James. In his senior season in 2016-2017, he brought his team in Seattle to a national championship and an undefeated season. He averaged 36 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 assists on a 29-0 national championship season. He was the number 2 recruit coming out of high school, and he was one of those players that was simply transcendent. A high school coach that had to face him said this about Michael Porter Jr., quote, "Michael Porter is the best high school player I've ever seen or played against. There's nothing that he can't do on a basketball court. He can post you up and punish you, but if you put a big man on him, he'll just go outside and keep moving back to 28, 29 feet. He's the first high school player I've ever seen who is basically unguardable." And that's the thing about Michael Porter Jr. is just that in high school, he just showed that he had this skill set where he could do so much that, quite frankly, he was just unstoppable. And by the time he got to college, he was considered the consensus #1 pick. People were calling him the best prospect to be coming into the draft since LeBron James. So then the question is, what happened in college? Why didn't we hear about him much? Why exactly did he go to the Denver Nuggets at 14th in the draft? Michael Porter Jr.'s college career was cut short due to a terrible back injury that he suffered 2 minutes into his very first college game. He would go out and play against Iowa State and fell down with this terrible back injury, and then he came back in the month of March during the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament, which saw him trying to come back and play the best that he could to carry Missouri to a national championship. But unfortunately, with those injuries that he did sustain, he was not able to come out and be the same player. And it not only affected him during his college days, but through the NBA draft process as well, as he had to get 2 surgeries on his back. And during the draft workouts, at one point, he had muscle spasms that were so bad that he couldn't even get out of bed. So Michael Porter Jr., it was questioning what would even happen. Would he even be the same player? Would he be this on-fire prospect that he was in college and in high school? Because Michael Porter Jr. was seen as the next LeBron James potentially. He had a skill set coming out of high school that was seen like no other, like we just talked about. So the Denver Nuggets have this opportunity, seeing this guy fall into their laps at the number 14th pick. And they're a franchise who already has the likes of Nikola Jokic, a young Jamal Murray, and now you have Michael Porter Jr., a 6'9" wing player who's shown that can score on multiple levels of the court, and the only concern is potentially his health? Absolutely, Denver's going to sign up for that. It's a low-risk, high-reward draft pick. And you know what? It's ultimately turning out to be a pretty darn good thing for the Denver Nuggets. Getting drafted to Denver proved to be the perfect thing for Michael Porter Jr., as he was able to rest his entire rookie season and heal from these back injuries that he sustained in college. This proved to be a huge difference for Michael Porter Jr. because he was able to come back next year and play NBA games. And he came out, and in his first season, he actually played pretty well, averaging 9 points, 4 rebounds, 50% shooting, and only 16 minutes a game. You got to keep in mind, even though those stats do not sound flashy, this was his first organized basketball in essentially 2 years, as he was only able to play 3 games in college, and he was not really able to have much experience in the NBA leading up to this point. But it wasn't until Michael Porter Jr. reached the NBA bubble that exact season that we were beginning to see those flashes of why he was considered a potential number 1 pick in the draft that saw the likes of Luka Doncic, Trae Young, DeAndre Ayton, and Marvin Bagley III, which we're not going to talk about today, but definitely in another video because the Sacramento Kings, holy crap, you screwed up. But that's a conversation for a different day. In the NBA bubble, Michael Porter Jr. is able to put up 14 points, 7 rebounds, 50% shooting on 26 minutes a game. And a lot of his teammates were just impressed. And quite frankly, Michael Porter Jr. was one of the stars of the NBA bubble. And each time he stepped out on the court, he was looking more and more impressive. It was clear that Denver had a solid piece on their hands. No one knew exactly how good Michael Porter Jr. could be because of his injury history. But then, in his second season in the league this past year, Michael Porter Jr. averaged 31 minutes a game, averaged 19 points, 7 rebounds, and 54% shooting. The thing that was special about him is not only was he able to score efficiently, but he was able to score in a high volume and become that third option for the Denver Nuggets. And if that's your third option, that is a special third option to have. And then Michael Porter Jr., he does the thing that he did in the bubble and steps it up in the playoffs, and he only gets better. And the thing is that in those playoff games, he had 4 20-point games and was helping carry Denver through that first round against the Portland Trailblazers. The simple thing is that they were not even supposed to get that far because of the Jamal Murray injury. They were able to get past the first round and ultimately had to meet the Phoenix Suns, which they did get eliminated by in that second round. But Michael Porter Jr. proved, if anything during those playoffs, that this would be a temporary bump in the road and that they were only going to get better and only going to reach higher heights. Michael Porter Jr. shows a special ability to shoot the 3 in the NBA. His athletic ability is very much been on display, and his health really hasn't been much of an issue, as he's been able to appear in almost every single game that he's had to, other than his very first season in the league. Michael Porter Jr. has this elite skill set, and to me, I see him taking an all-star leap this season, as he's shown that he has the capabilities and the tools in his bag to do so. And now, with the injury to Jamal Murray, there is more of a need than ever for Michael Porter Jr. to stand up. And now a contract like this is very much a reason to do so. Mark my words, Michael Porter Jr. will be an all-star this season. And in the next 5 years, I think he's going to be considered one of the top 10 best players in the game. With his elite shooting skill set, with his overall athleticism, his great defensive capabilities, and to have guys like Jokic right next to him on that roster, and Jamal Murray, and Aaron Gordon, I think this team is going to be contending for titles for years, and Michael Porter Jr. is going to be the X factor of how far they can go. And with a 5-year, $207 million contract with incentives built in, it is clear that the Denver Nuggets feel the exact same way and are going all in on this young nucleus of the Joker, Michael Porter Jr., and Jamal Murray. And don't get me wrong, Jokic is special. He's a top 5 player in the league. He won MVP. But I think Michael Porter Jr. might be the secret sauce to the Denver Nuggets' success. And I think we're going to see a young player blossom into an all-star this season. And with that, that is what I think of Michael Porter Jr. I am so excited to watch him play this season, and I think you should be too. What do you think of Michael Porter Jr.? What do you think of the Denver Nuggets? I still think they're in a weird situation with the Jamal Murray injury, and if all three were able to play together healthy, I think we'd be seeing a team that could make a push for the NBA Finals. But with that, I want to thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Watch the other videos we have on this channel, as there are a lot of other different topics we talk about covering the NBA. But with that, I want to thank you so much, and I will catch you next time from Half Court. Be sure to subscribe.